Hello.
Good
Hey,
call.
there we are.
Hey, awesome. Obviously, we're getting a little bit more comfortable here. This is, I should probably show who I am. This is Karina. Hi, talking to you from the GameDev Cafe with today's interview subject, Hamish Todd. Thank you, Hamish, for joining us. As some of you may already know, if you've tuned in before, this is coming to you from the GameDev Cafe. GameDevCafe.com is our website. We interview all sorts of different people who are involved in making digital art, video games in the traditional sense, explanatory, explorational games like what we're going to look at today. And yeah, we try to feature people who maybe have some advice or some experience for others. In this particular case, Hamish is I guess someone who came across my radar because of his work, obviously in the games industry. We first, we didn't actually meet person to person, did we? But we actually first experienced each other at the experimental gameplay workshop stage at GDC 2017, which is a wonderful place if you are ever looking to, I guess, see weird and wonderful things being done in games, especially by people who are taking a lot of risks. I think that's the biggest and coolest thing about the experimental gameplay workshop. That is how I was introduced to Hamish and his, I believe, most recent project, Virus Patterns. So let me just turn, I've got a little bit of music on here. I'm gonna put a stop to that, and yeah, that way we can chat a little bit more easily. But I guess let's start first of all, Hamish, if you don't mind explaining sort of what it is you do. And I don't know if for a living is the right word, but yeah, like what's sort of your title or your role really?
I'm technically a biologist, actually.
Oh, interesting.
So I'm doing a PhD at the University of Edinburgh in Scotland. I work on interactive stuff sort of in my spare time, but actually my PhD, it is part of my PhD. So
okay.
The thing that I released most recently, and which you saw, Virus: The Beauty of the Beast, that was based on my master's dissertation. It is actually meant as part of it is meant as a piece of software to be used by biologists, but then it was really, really fun. I did intend it originally just as software, but it was really fun, and I had a background making video games, and I thought I could make something really nice and interesting for a lot of people out of this. But my position, I have worked in the games industry before, to be clear. I left it for science because well, that allowed me to work on the things that I was interested in. I was sort of interested in the intersection of science and video games, but I would still consider myself a video game designer. Hobby, and I wouldn't consider myself a hobbyist game designer either. I mean, that my actual PhD involves making virtual reality stuff, and
cool. Okay.
And what I'm making there is not video games, but it is. But I'm trying to I'm trying to think of it in a somewhat video gamey way. So yeah.
Interesting.
That's my.
And I guess just so that we're kind of all on the same page, when you say in a video gamey way, does that involve it having to be sort of in the digital sphere, or does that mean people have to like enjoy it?
Enjoy it. That's pretty much the fundamental way of saying it. I want it to be a piece of software such that you really that someone would get up in the morning and actually want to use. So I mean, to give some examples, like Fold It is the famous example. Fold It, yeah, sort of a piece of software, sort of a video game, more of a video game. And with the thing that I'm making, I should probably just say what it is. It's similar to Fold It, and this is for my PhD. This is not the thing that you saw.
And this is not available on the web, right? This is sort of a secret project. Okay.
Secrets in the set. Okay, well, I guess this would be sort of the first announcement.
Exclusive.
Yes. So what I'm making is a virtual reality version of a piece of software called Coop. Coop is biologists use to work out what molecules look like. So the famous example is DNA, with the twirly molecule, your body is full of it. Hemoglobin is another molecule, your body is full of hemoglobin, your body is full of insulin, all sorts of other molecules in there. Coot is a piece of software, and I'm making a virtual reality interface for Coot.
Fascinating.
And thank you. I find it interesting. It's been horrible in the last few days because virtual reality is a moving target. You've got to keep everything updated, and yeah. Anyway, blah blah blah.
Oh, I'm glad you said that. I was going to ask. It must be one of the more challenging places to work. Did you choose that, or was that a condition of the program, or?
I chose it to a large extent. My PhD was meant to be about one specific set of molecules, but I thought, I'm kind of. It was about trying to create a visualization of a specific set of molecules that are linked to cancer. I was like, oh, these are very interesting, and I did make a little thing about those. These are kind of interesting, but what I'm really interested in is this opportunity to do something with virtual reality.
I see.
And that links to the previous question because I was attracted to it because there are ways of interacting with, let's just say, interacting with data in virtual reality that I find exciting. Mm-hmm. Even though I'm making a piece of software which, very serious, hard-nosed biologists want to sit down and they want to use the software. They're like, I don't care if it's fun. The fun is, what I'm interested in is trying to work out what this molecule looks like.
Right.
I can't be thinking all day about, oh, it would be fun if you had this and it would be fun if you had that. No, it's not like that. There are just things about virtual reality and things about creating new and elegant, implementing new things in virtual reality. It's very easy to implement new things in virtual reality because everything is sort of new. Mm-hmm. And part of the reason I want to do that is because I'm interested in the long term in making an aesthetic thing. I'm interested in making something that will be just super fun.
Gotcha.
And and by thinking about ways to interact with the data that biologists are thinking about in virtual reality, I'm hoping to find those new and fun ideas.
Interesting. Is working with something that's sort of, especially biology, because it has to do with everyone's health and I guess everyone's interested in how it can help us. Is it important to you then that in also being fun and having like an aesthetic value, that it also has some kind of scientific value, or is that sort of not the first concern?
No, the first concern is the scientific value.
Gotcha. That's so, because it's very accurate and precise, and obviously you're putting a lot of time and research into it. I mean, I look at your sort of virus simulator, so to speak, and you could have abstracted that. It still would have been super cool. Like, there's been video games that have played with that idea before. Spore, I guess, comes to mind. But you are sort of delivering real information. So this isn't just a fun experience. The idea is like along the way, people are enlightened, I guess. Cool.
Yeah, that's very much the idea. It's so for me, and this goes pretty straight to the heart of what I'm interested in pursuing in video games. I feel that video games offer wonderful ways of communicating true things. People don't usually think of that as the purpose of a video game, but I would claim that a lot of video games that lots of people like, they like them because they communicate true and wonderful stuff.
Yes.
The big example would be Portal. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Portal teaches you. Well, I say teaches, and teaches is maybe a loaded term here, but it's not completely inappropriate. Portal is a wonderful, fun video game that absolutely anybody can enjoy. In fact, a lot of people will say it's one of the most fun video games ever. I
Mm-hmm.
I find it one of the most fun video games ever.
Mm-hmm.
But for Portal, part of the wonderful thing about it is that every puzzle you think, oh wow, like I didn't know that like this was possible. Every new
Yes.
puzzle shows you a new possibility. And yeah, that's sort of what interests me about video games. Yeah, and that doesn't directly link to the virtual reality thing,
Mm-hmm.
the
Mm-hmm.
virtual reality molecules thing, but there is a bit of a bridge. Like if you think of some new way of interacting with information,
Mm-hmm.
and to some extent, a video game is a way of interacting with new information. Like, okay, the information is not like hugely important stuff. Like, say you're playing Super Mario Brothers. There's some information in the Nintendo Entertainment System when you're playing Super Mario Brothers. There's the location of all the blocks. There's the location of Mario. There's Mario's momentum, and there's all the Goombas. And these are all literal numbers that you are sort of interacting with when you play the game.
Mm-hmm.
And that's very sort of abstract, wishy-washy way of putting it. But like, that's the general thing that a computer system does, and a video game is just that, plus with the intention of being enjoyable.
Right.
Yeah, and when you're making a piece of biology software, you're trying to think about, okay, the information is stuff that comes from the real world.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just Mario's location and momentum, it's the location and momentum of a bunch of atoms, for example.
Mm-hmm.
But you can end up doing similar kinds of things. Honestly, when you pick up so my cousin works on black holes. He does
Cool.
computer simulation. Yeah, computer simulations of black holes, and there are lots of people all over the world doing this. And what they actually do with their simulations is really quite similar to playing around with things.
Mm-hmm.
They take some data from the real world and they put it into a simulation, and they say, oh, okay, so what happens if you like double the size of this black hole, for example? Like, how does that change the way that things are spinning around it? And there's a really close analogy there between a bit of scientific simulation software and video game. And yeah, there are various things that I'm trying to do that are in between those two things. My PhD project is very much, this is some information, and you are trying to work out what's going on in this information. Music of the Spheres is a puzzle game that I made, and that's all the way to the other end of the spectrum. It's a video game. It's a little bit, because there are things that you learn from it, blah, blah, blah.
Well, they are interchangeable, but I think you kind of hit the nail on the head in that when you're creating in either medium, you're working with these constraints that you're trying to convey, whether they're coming from the real world or this made-up world of pipes and blocks that we've invented, but conveying those in a way that's both meaningful to the player and obviously consistent. The burden is sort of placed on you as the developer. Since you mentioned that you've made a couple games, we'll get to that in a second, do you find that there's a difference in terms of the level of, I don't necessarily mean difficulty to make it, because obviously there's different sort of scopes involved with a VR project and Music of the Spheres, a smaller video game, but are they, is there any difference in the difficulty for you in terms of how you approach them?
Difference in the difficulty,
because I mean, a video game has to be fun. The other one, is probably going to impress regardless.
Oh, yeah, you say that. I can see why it might seem that way. I mean, a piece of scientific software has to help you discover something new, and if it doesn't help you discover something new, then it's failed in its job, and it can be terribly, terribly difficult to make a piece of software that manages to do that. And similarly, you think about something like Flappy Bird. Flappy Bird is a very fun game, even though it didn't take a huge amount of work to make, is my understanding. Yeah, and there are very, very different scales of how difficult it is to make video games. The first video game I made took me half an hour to make, and that is very worthwhile as a first exercise. If to those of you who maybe haven't made your first game yet, do not try to make a big, ambitious, difficult game. Make the simplest thing that you reckon you can make.
Baby steps.
Um,
Do you remember how you made that game?
yeah.
What did you use an engine
I
to
was
make that?
in
Oh, cool.
Game Maker.
Lovely.
Yeah. It was in Game Maker. I say that, I think it might have been 40 minutes, not 30 minutes.
Little QA.
And it was, it wasn't very fun, but it wasn't. The fun level was not 0, and so yeah. Nowadays, I've got there's a habit that I'm into, which is I want to make things that are difficult from a programming point of view. Something that's difficult to program is interesting to program. If it's not difficult to program, it's kind of boring to program, and almost by definition. And I've realized that it's so tempting to go for something that's difficult or interesting to program, but that doesn't necessarily create something that's got a lot of value for the user. And the things that have a lot of value for the user might be things that are incredibly simple to program. There might be very, very low-hanging fruit, and I want to.
Very true.
There might be video games out there that someone could, in principle, program in like half an hour, but it would be like the most fun and innovative video game ever. I mean,
absolutely.
That's sort of what Flappy Bird.
Well, I guess you'll sort of have to keep one-upping yourself in that sense, because you've gone from building very simple games. Obviously, I guess Music of the Spheres. Let's talk about that for a second. How far along in your game development career did that game come about? Because it's pretty fun. I know it's relatively simple and sort of like a, it's a basic shooter game. For anyone who's not familiar with it, we'll put up links so that everyone can find these games afterwards. But musically, it's very interesting, and it's, I guess, deeper than just a simple shooter. So how long did it take you to get to that point in your game development career?
That I sort of didn't follow the advice that I just gave.
Live and learn.
The Spheres was the second game. Was, I guess you'd say, the third game that I made. The first game that I ever made was that half-hour one.
Okay.
The second video game I made, I didn't finish it because it was like a 6-month project and it was overambitious. Music of the Spheres, I started right after finishing that one, and it took me a long time. It took me, but it was it still felt like it was extremely early on in my video game career, because it was the first sort of biggish. It was my first release. It was my first release, kind of my first released game that I ever worked on, and it took about 2 years to make.
Oh, okay, wow. So did that game come about as a result of you having some kind of funding for it, or did you just put yourself in that position?
That game came about, from me saying, like, I was at university and I wanted to teach myself to program, and I was like, but I was also interested in level design a lot.
Okay. I can see that.
I want to make something I want to make something that'll allow me to create really interesting levels. And I want to make something that I can program with my current level of programming proficiency.
Okay.
And Music of the Spheres, it's about bouncing bullets. And bouncing bullets are pretty damned easy to program. I did manage to make it hard for myself, pretty stupidly. They're pretty easy to program. And I worked on... what was the question again?
Basically, when you developed this game, I guess what I'm wondering, maybe time wasn't the right question to ask, but how much learning did you have to do before you were able to make this kind of game? Did it take like a lot of study and prep and experience?
Yeah, so I was learning to program while I was programming Music of the Spheres.
Gotcha.
And that is a pretty good way of going about things, because I wasn't studying computer science. At university, I was studying philosophy and mathematics.
Oh, I took a philosophy degree. Woo woo! Hooray! Yay!
Very,
And
very
we all
good.
ended up in
Unique
other
video game.
degrees. Yeah.
I would claim that philosophy is a very good degree if you want to make video games, in a sense, because there are so many open questions in video game design, and you really want to be rigorous and clever about how you answer those questions, and because they are intellectual questions, they're not just questions about beauty. So yeah, but that's philosophy. So, but my point was, I was saying, I studied philosophy and mathematics. There was pretty much no programming involved with that. So I had to teach myself programming in my spare time, and I had a book, and I had the SDL tutorials, and I was like, it was really good to have a project like Music of the Spheres to motivate me. I was like, okay, now I'll teach myself, I'll teach myself bitwise operators so that I can do the artificial intelligence for the angels moving around.
Right.
Yeah, and that is motivated learning is very much the thing that you want to be getting yourself to do.
Absolutely. That's really good advice. Most of the devs that we've spoken to actually are in that same situation where they're very much self-taught, and self-taught not necessarily because someone was paying them to like hustle and figure it out, but just because they have that drive. It's a really common characteristic, and actually a really admirable one, because I don't program games. I just talk to people who do, and I play a lot of games. Having said that, you know that I'm a big fan of Music of the Spheres. I love the different visual components that are worked in, even though they're very simple. Like it kind of gets complex as you go through it. And as you know, I like the fact that you're shooting angels. It's really, I think that's very memorable. When it comes to then some of your other games, I guess, is there anything that you would say is equally memorable? This game was sort of about you learning how to program, and maybe was a particular milestone in your development career, but are there any other games that sort of stand out that way?
Well, I haven't made very many games. Pretty much all of them feel kind of special in one way or another.
I guess that's true.
I've not been like the Stephen Lavelle or Cactus sort of thing, making loads and loads and loads of games. In some sense, if I made a game that didn't have anything remarkable about it, then that would be kind of remarkable, because it might be my first unremarkable game. Pretty. With every project that I've done so far, again, it's a bad habit, but I've tried to do something completely new. So Music of the Spheres was my first puzzle game, and the other game that I programmed around about that time was The Stranger Loop.
Yes.
And that was my first, interactive documentary thing that was trying to sort of combine gameplay with narration, and so I try something new with pretty much everything. There's an exception to that, which is right now I'm making my first thing that I'm not trying anything new with, but I'm just at the beginning of that, so nothing.
We'll come back to that. Actually, the Stranger Loop is an interesting one too, if you're into like Mobius strips and sort of that whole notion of physics, infinity concepts. It's an interesting demo. I guess I'm very curious, because you have like a lot to say about games, and you have a very interesting philosophy about your approach to games. Is this something that you always wanted to end up doing? I know that you took various degrees, so it sounds like maybe this was a path that you happened upon rather than planned to follow.
Did I always want to do this? Not really, no. I quite liked maths and science when I was a kid. No, I liked them a lot. The games that I played in my teenage years were all Japanese role-playing games.
Nice.
Yes. But none of those, I never wanted to make one of those. I decided video games was what I was really interested in when I was about, what had I been, 18. That's when which is quite old, in a sense. I mean, I talk to people like the big indie developers, because I saw, when you read their stuff, they're like, oh, I always wanted to make video games as a kid. I made my first game when I was like 7 years old,
Yeah.
and I taught myself, basic and this kind of thing. And that can be kind of intimidating and it's not really fair because, well, I say it's not fair. Life isn't fair, but like, you know, I feel like school didn't really offer the opportunity to do that kind of thing.
Yes.
At least not when I was a kid.
Mm-hmm.
And then, but then, and the kids that could program at the age of 7 or at the age of 13 tended to be like, oh, my older brother or like my mum or my dad taught me programming, and yeah, it's annoying. I didn't have anyone like that.
You feel like you're left out, right? And then how do I even do this?
Yeah, and then you're like, all these people are 5 steps ahead of me. But that doesn't mean that you can't do something very interesting at any age you like. The example that I like to give to people is Franz Kafka. Franz Kafka, don't know when he started writing, but he never published a damn thing during his life. But he's now recognized as one of the greatest writers of modern times.
Absolutely. So I think that's a good lesson, especially for people who might be watching, thinking that people who appear to have made it were always set on this path, or always had, again, sort of a plan or a desire. Now, you mentioned that sort of when you were 18, you sort of had the desire to get into game development. Did you just start by setting out on your own and learning what you could? Did you try to seek a career path that sort of aligned with that, or how did it all kind of come together?
So I guess when I was first thinking about it, I was like, ooh, I really wanted to be like Ken Levine,
Mm-hmm.
right? And be able to like boss people around, like, okay, like you artists, you go and do this, and you programmers, you do that, and the level designers and the sound recordists and the voice actors and the writers, like boss loads of people around, and I'm
The
like
conductor,
in charge.
yeah.
Yeah. I was thinking like, it'd be great to be that, and like, how would I do that? I guess I'd like go and work at Ubisoft and be like the QA tester and like make your way up slowly, sort of this kind of thing. And so I was thinking about that, but just to say, those of you out there who are thinking like that, you want to be the big man or woman at Ubisoft or whatever, that's a terrible way to think about things. It's so terrible. And it's not just because like it's unfeasible, which maybe it is. Maybe you got some good connections and you're like, oh, I could be that person. But like, really, you could not pay me to take up that position now, because if you're Ken Levine, you do have constraints on you, and you do have internal politics in a place like that.
Yes.
And okay, going back to the question, when I started out, I was 18. Yeah, I had that idea of being like a big game developer, but I was like, oh well, I guess I've got to start like making my own little video games,
Mm-hmm.
and that's what everybody has to start with. But like you have way more freedom, and you have way more, you have so much closer of a connection to what you're creating when you're in that situation.
Mm-hmm.
So you should not want to let go of that. It's great starting out. It's great starting a new project, and so long as you've got the right idea, so long as you've got an idea that you can implement and you can see results with, you can be in a much better creative situation than you can if you're in charge of lots and lots of people.
That's interesting, because so many people have this, sense that if they haven't made it, or if they're still struggling, that there's a lack of freedom that goes with that, because I get forced to, slave away at a day job, and like I don't get to like work at my dream job and all, this stuff. But it's true. It is very creatively liberating to work for yourself on your own, and to do a slow build, I think is also, maybe the point being made here. Learn along the way, and as you say, you may not develop the same type of game in the beginning as you end up making in the end. That's really fascinating. Was there anyone along the way who you sort of sought out as a mentor, or even just people online who you kind of followed or looked to as sort of leaders in that sense?
No, not really. Okay, not a mentor, but the lectures given by Jonathan Blow were tremendously inspiring to me. It's almost comical how much they influenced me. For example, he has a lecture on how I'm going to summarize it as Bioshock is not a very good game, but Gravitation is a really, really good game. Not many people have heard of Gravitation, but Gravitation, I hadn't played it before I saw that lecture.
Okay.
But now, and when I saw that lecture, Bioshock was my favorite game of all time. And I was like, oh, Gravitation maybe looks kind of interesting. On the face of it, it looks like a crappy game. But now, like, I completely came around to what he was saying in that lecture.
Interesting.
I don't think much of Bioshock anymore, and I do think that Gravitation is one of the best games of all time. And that's a detail, doesn't matter. Jonathan Blow had a very big impact on me.
Fantastic.
As a result of seeing Jonathan Blow stuff. Yeah, I came around to. I was interested in Casey Muratori as well. I think he's acting as a mentor to a lot of people now. He does Handmade Hero. That I don't know if many people here have heard of Handmade Hero, but Handmade Hero is a great way to program. And one of the first things that I ever tweeted was I asked Casey Muratori for advice as someone who's just getting started programming video games. And he gave me only one piece of advice, but it is the best piece of advice, which is practice, practice, practice. There isn't a whole lot of point in just reading books, whatever. Just practice.
Interesting. Very sage advice. And like I said, it's something that seems to be a very common thread amongst anyone who has any shred of success as far as a game developer, that they've gone through the paces, they've probably beaten their head over a desk at some point to get where they are today. Practice, practice, practice. Very cool.
Yeah. Just one other thing.
Yeah.
I do want to re-emphasize the point that I was making about when I was getting started. Like, there's the term ideas guy. Yeah. That's the person that I wanted to be. I wanted to be Ken Levine, the ideas guy, the guy in charge who, doesn't have time to do the programming or the level design. They've got like the big picture in mind.
Yes.
Just to say it again, that's a terrible thing to want to do. Don't be that. There's nothing good about being the ideas guy. There's nothing good about having some idea that you're obsessed with, and you're like, I'm going to work my way up and I'm going to implement that idea, and that idea is going to change the world. It's just not like that. Game development is not like that. It's not about pursuing one idea until it's like the biggest game in the world. It's about having so many ideas every day and just pursuing those ideas and practicing how to implement ideas and getting new ideas, and the ideas replace the old ideas, making small things and then making bigger things, and learning how to implement your ideas. Implementation.
And in the sense, so implementation, practice, and I guess experimentation is really important there too. Don't get discouraged if you happen to fail. Is there anything that now that you've sort of come to this point in your life, and not to say that you've reached your pinnacle or anything, but now that you're probably at a more high level of understanding, at least around game development, than you were back then, is there anything that you feel you did really wrong or backwards? I know you mentioned that you didn't take all of your advice, but more specifically when it came to the producing and making the games themselves, is there anything in the process that you've learned just doesn't work or should be avoided?
Just doesn't. Yes, I do have a piece of advice, but it's extremely controversial. Nobody will agree with me.
We like controversy.
A lot of ideas work like this is okay. This is an ill-formed game bit of advice.
I sprung this on him,
But a lot-
everyone. So just to be fair.
Okay. I don't know if I have the right way of saying it, but okay. It's about the distinction between a good idea and a bad idea. And part of what we've just been talking about and practice and implementation is that you learn the difference between a good idea and a bad idea. And to be clear, and this is interestingly also true in science as well as art, when you have an idea, your idea to you is like the most amazing thing in the world. Like, even little small things, you're like, oh my god, this is just gonna blow people's minds. Yeah. And it's possible that you never get out of that habit. The greatest mathematical artist of all time is, of course, MC Escher.
Yes.
And MC Escher once said that when he has ideas, they feel like the greatest ideas in the history of humanity. Okay, part of the craft of game design and the craft of anything is learning the difference between a good idea and a bad idea and which ideas you should pursue. One thing that I might say about there's a category of ideas which I might call story gameplay blending ideas. And in my experience, those are bad ideas. They are. It's a pity because this is why it's hugely controversial. People are like, no, that's the best kind of idea. You want the gameplay and the story to be like meshed together. But in my experience, those ideas tend to lead to either compromises to gameplay or compromises to story. And one game that I would give people as an example of being full of story gameplay blending ideas is the Disaster Report series. Not many people have heard of these games. They haven't heard of them for a reason. It's because they're really bad and really kind of boring or frustrating, and so they don't feel really good to play. But they are full of ideas. There's so many ideas in them. And they're ideas which on paper sound good, and they do blend story and gameplay. And you might say, oh, well, they just implemented them badly. But, be rigorous. I'd recommend it to anybody who maybe says, no, those ideas, the best ideas. I recommend that you play the Disaster Report games. The best one is Disaster Report 2. It's quite, you'd have to get up a PS2 emulator probably. But, yeah.
Interesting.
You'll see what I mean.
Very interesting.
Those feel like the best kinds of ideas, but they're not. Would be my claim.
No, I think
I
think you're spot on. And as someone who works with many game dev teams, sort of listening to them brainstorm ideas and at game jams, hearing people, conceptualize something that they think is brilliant. As a player, it often doesn't translate when that's the focus. I completely agree. Would you? And I don't know if this is easy to sort of define, but is there something then that makes a game really good, or is there an idea that you feel is the best place to start when it comes to a game?
No, there's no thing that makes a game good. That's too broad.
That's a misnomer. There's a few things that make them bad, but nothing that makes them amazing. Is there anything that you've seen in games that you especially enjoy? Like, is there any aspect of games or maybe common thread among the games that you play that is distinctive?
Well, I can answer the sort of second part of that question. Like, what is a good place to start with a game? And I'm absolutely convinced that the best place to start with a game is with the system. You have to start, but by the system, I mean the objects that are going to be in the game, deciding what are the objects that are going to be in the game and what is the behavior of those objects.
Gotcha.
You certainly have to start programming the game that way, and I would put it forward that that's the way that you should start making the game as well. And to be clear, like not everybody does it that way. You can start a game saying like, oh, the point of this game is like the story. So like Bioshock starts this way. This is going to be like a really... Is that true? No. Sorry, Bioshock... I was about to say Bioshock started that way because it's like, oh, it's going to be this cool game about like this undersea, like collapsed civilization. And you might say on the face of it, that was the idea that generated Bioshock. But on the other hand, you might say that's not true. Bioshock started out as a first-person shooter, and so there were already a bunch of decisions about what was going to be in the game already made, and then the story got sort of put on top of that. I actually don't know what it is, but what's the best way to start a game? That's the best. What are the objects that are going to be in the game, and what's the behavior between those objects? And a mistake that I might say people make is that they're thinking at a sort of more abstract level. They sort of say, okay, what are the feelings that the game is going to evoke? And I will say that one of my favorite games of all time, to give a counterexample to the thing that I'm arguing, one of my favorite games of all time is Journey, and I understand that Journey started with a feeling. Journey started with a feeling that evoke, and then they designed everything around that.
I mean, it's a pretty unique example, I would say, as far as a game that's successful for many reasons, but specifically that reason. It's an impressive game, but it's not something that I think can be easily replicated. Yeah.
I'll say that to ground this somewhat, Braid started out. No, Portal. Portal started out brilliantly. They were like, what are the new objects that are going to be in this game? The objects are going to be these portals that, like, you go through this portal and you come out that portal, and then things come out from there, and they say, oh, I guess there should be like an avatar in the game, and I guess there should be like blocks in the game that you can like throw through the portal and stuff like that. But the original idea came from the idea of portals. A game that started out in a bad way, I would say, was Disaster Report. Disaster Report started out with, this is going to be a game about surviving a flood.
Gotcha.
And
which is very different ways of approaching.
That's that's sort of an overarching idea, and that was what drove the development team. And so they were like, okay, what are the objects that are going to be in the game? And they decided that after they decided the fundamental theme of the game, and the objects that ended up being in the game ended up being these, rather ill-conceived things.
Yes.
I would say, and then, and with nothing unique about them.
Yes.
And so yes.
Interesting.
Start with the objects and the behavior.
Are there any games, I know you've actually mentioned a few since we've been talking, but are there any games that are out right now or maybe coming out very soon that you expect to, hit a high note as far as the balance between those two elements? Anything that you're really looking forward to?
I don't know if it's coming out soon. God knows if it's coming out soon, but Miyagakure is a game that I have been looking forward to for a long, long time. I don't want to complain too much about when it's going to come out because it's made by one of the most talented people in the industry, and also a guy I would say I know pretty well, and he's made some very good decisions on that game, and I'm very happy for him to spend as much time as he needs to make the game. Game comes out soon. That is a game that crafted extremely well, where the guy who those looking for advice on game craft, one of the best lectures, best documentations on game design ever is a lecture given by Mark Ten Bosch, who's making Miyagakure, and Jonathan Blow, who made Braid and The Witness, and they talk about their design process and the principles that lead them to decide the objects and the behaviors that are going to be in their games, and then later the level design of their games. And it's a tremendous lecture, and it is called "Designing the Universe."
Oh,
Um,
that sounds delicious.
yeah, it's highfalutin, but man, it deserves to be highfalutin because it's very clever indeed.
Awesome. Very cool. Um, that's some great examples. I guess there's nothing that you're working on that's coming out soon, correct? Yours is sort of a
Oh,
long-term.
that's not true. I am doing a little thing, a very little thing, so little. I'm going to be there's a small chance that some of you might have heard of Numberphile. Numberphile is a YouTube channel. They do videos about math. Yeah.
Cool.
What I'm doing right now is I'm going to be on Numberphile. Hopefully you will be seeing, if you subscribe to them on YouTube, you'll see a video. It's a video about neuroscience and an interesting shape called a Klein bottle. Yeah, and so that's going to be a video. Hopefully it'll come out in the next few months. We haven't filmed it yet, blah, 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 but yeah, hopefully it'll come out in the next few months, and it's going to come out, if it does, with a little applet that I've developed, a little interactive thing, and to play around with that. And again, it is a video about a bit of mathematics, but I've brought some game design ideas into communicating some of the ideas that'll be on show there.
Very cool. I mean, that is pretty much the main reason that we wanted to talk to you today, is that you're someone who's making really unique explorational I guess experiences is the best way to put it. But I love the notion that you're trying to teach and let people experience things in new ways. And for the most part, they're things that people may think that they already kind of have a grasp of, but you're really diving into something deeper. We've had Virus, the Beauty of the Beast, sort of pulled up in the background while you've been talking, and it just strikes me as it sort of reminds me of the experimental gameplay workshop stage, and strikes me as funny because so many people were both impressed and sort of enchanted by it, and also very confused because, what is this thing? And this, very complicated, as you say, sort of applet or little game experience that someone's built that's non-traditional, but I'm learning it and I like it and I don't know why. I guess, as a final note, I'd be really interested to know how you feel. And I don't want to say the classroom because that's a little bit limited, but in terms of people learning things on the internet and having access to educational materials, how do you see games playing a role in that in the future? Is this something that everyone should be doing all the time and it's the best way to learn, or do you think it's difficult to get people to sort of embrace it?
That's such an important question, and it's a difficult question. Who knows what the future holds? I mean, I felt when I came up with the idea of the way that Virus the Beauty of the Beast works, for those who don't know, you have a video on the left and you have some stuff on the right. And the stuff on the right, you could almost think of it as like PowerPoint slides, but then it becomes interactive. And yeah, it becomes interactive, and you can experiment with like these models of virus evolution and these mathematical shapes and that kind of thing. It's really difficult. This is precisely what I'm like struggling with at the moment. I'm hoping to have some meetings pretty soon with some people working on education research. And in principle, education, it shouldn't be hard, but like I can't stop myself from thinking like, how can we implement educational reform to actually make use of computers in the way that they really should be used? Like, there are all sorts of ways that you can learn using computers, and then there are all of these ways that the current educational system makes it hard to implement them. But then on the other hand, it's not the educational system's fault, because the stuff out there is that there is stuff out there, but it's kind of hard to find and hard to really see how you could integrate it into anything, let alone into a classroom full of 30 kids, where you've got all sorts of things that you're worrying about. I was a maths teacher for a while.
Oh, so you understand. Awesome. Yeah, I was a teacher for 5 years, so we both know that the classroom's full of people who learn all at different levels, all at different paces, completely different mindsets, all individual personalities. I do feel, though, that this type of
limited budget and blah blah
blah. Yeah, but I do feel that this type of educational tool, in the broadest sense, should make it easier to get more people turned on, involved, aware, asking questions. I certainly think that when it comes to, education, research, and reform, you and people like yourself should have a seat at the table. This is where I see it going.
To give the the long-term goal, and this even comes back to something we were saying earlier. Like, there's a guy called Seymour Papert. And Seymour Papert wrote about, I would say, learning programming and learning maths. But it was so much cleverer than that. It was that makes it seem much smaller than what it is. It was about the way that humans apprehend the world, is what Seymour Papert was writing about. And he, the thing that people sort of know from him is Mindstorms and the turtle. Yeah, so Lego Mindstorms was sort of trying to implement Seymour Papert ideas, and the turtle is this thing that you can learn some basic programming with, and it's a very good way to learn. They sort of had it in my school, but they didn't use it properly, and so I only ever saw it, and so I didn't get to learn in the Seymour Papert sort of way. And the really Papert way to learn would be something extremely open-ended, where kids have their own projects that they're working on, and that motivates them to learn whatever they need to learn. And that's, but if you say that to a teacher, the teacher understandably is like, I can think of all sorts of difficulties with that.
Yeah.
And yeah, it is difficult. So I can't speculate on what the future of education is, but I do hope that the thing that I've made can help people come up with some new thoughts. I have my own idea about how to, even pursue it in the classroom. It's not directed at a classroom audience, because it's directed at someone who's sitting down and just feels like learning about viruses tonight.
Right. Yes.
That's who it's directed at. It's not directed at a classroom audience, but it's very easy to adapt it for a classroom audience, or to see something like it that maybe is that you do for your homework or something like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
no, I see these as self-teaching tools, honestly, and whether that's complementary to the classroom experience or exclusive of, people are curious and they want to learn, and making that information accessible is the key to keeping them interested. When it comes to your Coop project, I know you can't talk too much about it. Is there a timeline for that, or is it just in progress?
Timeline for it? Yes. Yes, indeed, there is a timeline for it. It has to be done in 2 years, because that's where my PhD funding.
TikTok.
So I guess it has to be. Yeah, it has to be done in less than 2 years, because I've got to be writing up for a lot of it, and you don't actually get any proper work while you're writing up.
That's the beauty of PhDs, yes.
Indeed. So in about a year and 3/4 or so, or something like that, hopefully you'll see some structural biologists waving their arms around in virtual reality, building hemoglobin molecules all over the place.
Awesome. Very cool. Well, Hamish, thank you so much for your time today. This has been totally fascinating. I think even more so than I initially thought. I knew that you made cool things. I didn't realize that you had so many cool ideas behind them. And I really like the idea that you're constantly thinking about, how to challenge both yourself and maybe challenge sort of standard conceptions of learning and video games. I really feel like this is important work, and I recognize that although it's being done in a PhD capacity, I do feel like this is something that can go mainstream and, you know, get you back up on those EGW stages, make sure that this gets out maybe beyond, you know, beyond the people who fully understand it already. I feel like this is a very big purpose behind game development, is to reach new people and teach them new things. So thank you.
It's very, very lovely of you to say that. Thank you very much for having me.
Lovely and honest is all I can bring to the table, to be honest with you. But Hamish, thank you again. For those of you who've been tuning in, we will have this obviously up on our YouTube channel. You can check it out at GameDevCafe.com. And in the meantime, if you happen to know someone who might be a suitable candidate for this interview, whether they're someone who's doing lofty things around education like Hamish, or even if they're just making games and doing something really cool and different, we would absolutely love to hear from you. Hamish, thank you again for joining us. And yeah, please.
I've just realized there's something I should probably publicize. I'm also going to be live streaming a playthrough of Pokemon Red, for which I have developed a type optimal team.
Oh.
This is the first time I've said that. I don't know when that's going to be, but that's something else that might come out before my my next little thing. So yes, live streaming.
Cool.
Playthrough of Pokemon Red with a team that I've used a bunch of Python scripts to work out. It's a sort of, from a certain point of view, it's an optimal team.
Oh my goodness, algorithmic Pokemon hacking. I love it. Very, very cool. Okay, well, keep us posted. We would be happy to, you know, sort of happy to reshare that stream and make sure that our audience can see it. You're going to put your skills to the test, you realize, depending on how the team does. But very, very cool. Hamish, thank you again for joining us. And yeah, if you've been watching, thank you again for tuning in. We will talk to you soon from the Game Dev Cafe.